Hello, hello. Welcome back for another episode of Six Rotations. He's Mick. I'm Daniel Gilman. We're no longer in the same city, so that's too bad. But I had a great trip down to Austin. Got to film a fun segment that we're going to show here at the end of this episode, interviewing Texas's Emma Halter and Molly Phillips. So stay tuned for that. And as always, we're brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. Mick, you and I had a lot of fun. I got to go over to the Mick Manor on Friday night, got to watch what was probably the most exciting night combined of college volleyball this season, with all of the madness and pandemonium with the ACC and with Nebraska's reverse sweep. We had a lot of fun. Your wife, Carrie, had all of the iPads out. We had every match going on at once. We got to really enjoy it all. What was your takeaway from this week and weekend in college volleyball?
Well, it seemed like that we were in the tournament, the way things were going. It was like madness with all the first and second round games that go on, and you're trying to watch all of them, and there are upsets brewing and people playing. But I sense that everybody is feeling insecure about getting into this tournament, and they're panicked and they're trying to play their way in. And so everybody that's even close to the bubble is going after anybody that's a top seed and trying to get a hold of some extra points to push themselves up the RPI.
Yeah, this is right around where I would definitely recommend that the fans that are interested in that would go ahead and look at ncaaStats.figstats.net. And that's where you can look at the live up-to-date RPI numbers that all of these people are either tweeting about or talking about. That's where you can find specifics. And that's also where we can see which conferences have been ranked amongst their RPI numbers. And so I don't think it's a surprise to too many that the Pac-12 conference here in its final season, it's funny, in football, they're stealing the show. In volleyball, the number one RPI conference continuing to shine yet again, with USC jumping up, beating Arizona State, Stanford toppling Washington State. I'm curious to hear, these are the top 5 in RPI conferences. And before we get to any of the rankings, I want you to kind of break this down for me. We've got Pac-12, SEC, Big 12, Big 10, ACC as the 1 through 5.
Pretty interesting, don't you think? And who would have thought? But right now, the interconference matches, the matches between conference rivals in each conference are unbelievably good to watch. And you never know what's going to happen. I never would have thought SC would have had a 3-0 sweep on ASU. And their first 2 games were very close, but the third one was just a thumper. And that was pretty interesting. I loved the matches in the SEC. They were all very close, some really, really close battles. Michigan State in the Big Ten, now at number 5 in the conference, thinks they can get into this tournament. Who would have known? And that's from their coach. But Dayton, high ranking in the RPI, very high ranking. Utah State, very high ranking in the RPI.
Top 15 for Utah State. That's incredible.
Yeah, teams we haven't been watching, and they're all moving up the ladder quite fast. Auburn had a really good win, and we're watching the top 4, but the fun part is watching the bottom group try to move either up into the 16 or move into the top below 50 in the RPI to make sure they're not a bubble team going into the tournament and allow the committee to place them in or out. They want to earn their own way in. So there's some real battles all the way through. So whoever you're a fan of, you've got something to watch and root for here. And the television ratings have been awesome because they're picking all of this up. And even in the smaller conferences, the battle is, can we get 2 teams in this year? The Sun Belt, for instance, has James Madison at something like 21, and
17.
Texas State is 35, and then you don't leave out South Alabama or Troy or Coastal Carolina. All of those teams are in the hunt to be in. Could the Sun Belt get as many as 3 teams into this tournament this year? That would be amazing.
Would be incredible. Yeah, James Madison at 17. Georgia Tech with a huge win over Louisville gets them in the top 16 in the RPI. And you mentioned viewership. Over 1.6 million people watched Wisconsin, Minnesota on Fox a week and a half ago. That is just a cataclysmic number. And more and more, we need more and more, right? Florida against Kentucky was moved to ESPN on Sunday. That's huge news. Just more and more of the push is just, it can't be bad. It's just going to continue being good for the sport. And so without further ado, let's look at the AVCA Taraflex top 5 here for this week on November 6th rankings. Nebraska, for the first time, finally getting every single first place vote. So the Husker fans no longer have to send death threats to the one coach a week that gives Wisconsin a first place vote like they have in the last 2 weeks. Nebraska stays unbeaten with an incredible reverse sweep over Penn State in sold out Rec Hall, over 6,500 fans on Friday night. Rowdy and reckless, and they were hitting smooth. Penn State was over 500 in that first set. It was a 25-16 first set. We saw what do we call it? You want to call them last chance U for Penn State, they've got a Clemson, a Michigan, a Purdue, and an Ohio State transfer in that starting lineup. 4 out of their 7 of the starters are moved around through that transfer portal, and they were looking smooth, but the 5th set came a knocking. It was tight, right? There was an 11-10 epic point with a big serving sub for Nebraska coming in, making it 12-10, 12-11, and then a net call on Nebraska pushed it from 13-11 to 13-12 instead of giving them a couple match points. It was 13-all, and the Huskers came out with 2 strong points to win the match and then swept Rutgers on Sunday. Let's give Nebraska their due here and just talk about them solely for a minute here. Watching them with you, Mick, really locking in on those 5 sets. What did you learn about the Huskers on Friday that you didn't know before?
Well, I think they can come back. I don't think they get rattled. I think they play hard all the time, and they're not afraid to swing. I don't know if that's their youth, but they're not afraid to swing, and they do take their swings. I think the middles are developing into a real strong group. Both those middles, the freshman and the sophomore, are both really good. You should watch both of these young kids play. But Beeson seems to be really stepping up now. I thought at first she was trying hard, not really getting it yet. But now it looks to me like she's got her confidence. She's full on coming at you from the back row, from the front row, and leading. So I give Nebraska their kudos for sure. And they still have a starter on the bench. So they have 7 starters now, not counting the libero. The libero is 8. So they are pushing. They can afford an injury anywhere but setter and middle blocker right now. And maybe libero, but I haven't seen the backup libero. But they're well organized. For them to give up the first 2 sets, I thought a little shaky. But you're on the road. You got the whiteout. You got everybody yelling at you, But they didn't panic. They just stayed with it. So they deserve to be number 1 now. But boy, I can't wait for that Wisconsin match, and can't overlook the teams they play before the Wisconsin match.
So just a couple stats. Beeson goes 27-4-54, a ridiculous 426 hitting percentage with unreal efficiency. Harper Murray, 15 kills. Alec in the middle with 11 kills. And yeah, without Krause as well, as she continues to work her way back to full health and come off the bench now. Merzik on the other side of things with 21 kills. But Penn State with a crippling loss on Sunday against Purdue. In my book, hard for Penn State to work themselves back into the hosting conversation, especially getting swept in the 2 matches against Purdue this season. That was the one chance for Shoemaker Cawley. Meanwhile, Nebraska has Northwestern on Wednesday, Illinois on Sunday, Michigan, Iowa the following weekend, and then they finish Black Friday at Wisconsin, the Saturday that finishes the season, November 25th at Minnesota. So that's the final schedule for the Huskers. The question is, will they finish the regular season unbeaten? I think there's a chance. There's a good chance.
That would be interesting to me, but I believe that Wisconsin will win this next match just because, and send us into free fall trying to figure out where to place the teams. But it certainly will give the committee some flexibility to put people in different spots.
So Wisconsin took care of Purdue on Wednesday. They sit 22-1 in second place. Texas had a couple in West Virginia. We saw Jarrett Elliott make some changes. No Asia O'Neal in the first match, no Bergmark in the second match, really using some of the bench in the middles to take care of West Virginia as Texas moves up from 4-3. Louisville falls from 3-5. Maybe, a chance for Louisville to still work their way into the top 4. They're going to need help now, though, as Stanford feels securely ahead and has over 100 more total points, according to the coaches. Of course, the coaches don't really matter when it comes to the seating of the committee. The committee did not show a lot of love to Texas, so we'll kind of see how these weeks work out. Texas has a tough one at Kansas State, but Stanford-Oregon is the match of this week coming up on Thursday.
Yeah, that will be absolutely a good match to watch. I wonder about the rankings. I had actually Oregon ahead of Louisville at this point. I think Louisville is functioning hard, playing hard, but not executing well. And so I don't know if Danny Busboom can get them back into a rhythm, but they're struggling to find a rhythm, and they count on DeBeer too much at this point. And she's really, she's ferocious out there, but she misses sometimes, and they need some other kids to stand up now and take some more responsibility. So it'll be interesting to watch. And Stanford or Texas, 3 or 4, I kind of still have Stanford 3, Texas 4, but you can't really fault Texas. They don't have anybody to play, so they can play the teams that are scheduled for them, but they're expected to win. So any slippage, like you have to wonder about Stanford. They lose one of the first 2 sets to Washington this weekend.
First set,
yeah. And that means just not focused going in. So all the teams are struggling with this, and it's not just one; it's all of them, except for maybe Nebraska and except for maybe Wisconsin right now.
Let me correct myself. Stanford fell the first set against Washington State on Friday, came back. It was a 1-0 lead for Stanford. Washington evened it on Sunday, but the card rolled. Meanwhile, for Louisville, a little bit of a break this week. They have Duke and North Carolina at home, but then they finish the year similarly to what we see with Nebraska. It's a great finish to the schedule in terms of from a fan's perspective, with November 18th, which is a weekend just for Louisville and Pittsburgh. That's their only match of the weekend in the penultimate weekend at Pitt. And then their final match comes the day before Thanksgiving against Georgia Tech in Louisville. So those are going to be 2 top 10 matchups, 2 must wins if Louisville wants to host through the regionals, which will be a lot of fun to keep tabs on. Let's take a look at the rest of our top 25 now, because Pitt and Georgia Tech both sitting in the top 10. Oregon will face Stanford. That's a 4 versus 6 as Washington State stays put at 9. And then, Mick, we see the jumbling of these SEC teams. 3 in the top 15 with Tennessee, who beat Florida in Florida for the first time in quite some time. Tennessee's first win in Gainesville since 2012. Despite Kennedy Martin's career match, it was, one of those underrated matches of Friday, right? It was like on the 3rd or 4th TV for some of you diehard fans, for us watching. And yet the 5th set was very entertaining as Kentucky took care of Florida on Sunday. Arkansas avoided a colossal upset, but did get upset as the coaches seemingly forgot about early in the week, as Arkansas was swept by Georgia and then beat Mississippi State on Sunday.
Yeah, I got the Apple TV that you recommended my wife. She's got 4 screens up now. So not only do we have 3 iPads and 4 screens on the big TV, so that's 7 matches at one time we can watch. And it's quite makes you quite anxious, to tell you the truth. So yeah, we're looking for all these matches, and it's pretty fun. In fact, I'm afraid people are going to start coming in the front door because everybody's rooting for somebody different.
Okay, so this is the situation. So I sat down with Mick and his wife, and she was wondering how to get multi-view going. And so this is the situation. If you want to watch multiple matches on your ESPN app for the tournament, you have to go buy an actual Apple TV. The Apple TV is a square device that plugs into your TV. It's the only streaming service that allows you to watch multi-view on the ESPN app. You can watch 4 at once. It is a must-have for NCAA tournament time. I feel like Carrie ordered it, and it came 1 or 2 days later. That
came the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, let's keep on going down through these rankings here. BYU with a key bounce back weekend. They continue with a good season, but those losses, the swept by Kansas State twice is certainly holding up a stink in my eye. I'm not sure how deserving the Cougars are of this top 15 spot in the polls. Mick, let's talk Creighton, though. Creighton got upset by Marquette early in the season. There was no chance of the Blue Jays losing on Sunday, was there? They took the second set 25-9 in a sweep over the Golden Eagles.
I'm telling you that when Creighton plays, they're as good as anybody out there. But why they don't play all the time, I don't get it. And I do know that when Sis is not in the lineup, they're definitely not as good. But when they have both of those left sides and they're healthy, and they play, I thought in September, I thought Creighton was going to be challenging for the top 4, and then nothing for about 6 weeks there. Sis in and out, team not functioning all the time, lost to Marquette. Now, though, I don't want to play them in the first or second round in the tournament. I'll tell you that. And maybe they get high enough that they get one of those 16 bids to host.
I agree. I have Creighton in my top 16. We're also going to talk about the Volleyball Magazine media top 16, the Super 16 poll that Mick and I vote on, and get an idea of who and where and what is pushed on there. I put Georgia Tech back in my top 16 with the win over Louisville. It was a must-win game for the Yellow Jackets in my mind. It was the first ever top 10 match between the two. And tell you what, Louisville kind of struggled against Clemson on Sunday too. They lost a set against a poor Tigers team. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen. The ACC is in such flux as Pittsburgh loses in 5 at Florida State. There was a crazy set of circumstances. FSU had match point. They served it out. Pittsburgh gave it right back at 14 all, made it 15-14 for Florida State. They won it. And then Pitt battled with Miami on Sunday. It looked like maybe a sweep. Miami takes the third. Fourth set goes to Pitt by 2 points. And speaking of survival modes, Kansas was pushed to the limit against Kansas State on Friday. That was another one of those tournament-style matches, tied at 7 all in the 5th. Kansas loses Reagan Cooper, one of their pin hitters, but London Davis goes off, 28 kills. It was a showing. Bolding for Kansas State had 15 kills with 0 errors. That was a true showing as the Big 12, Mick, 5 teams in the top 25. I'm really liking, as we shape towards the end of the year, Houston, UCF teams that might be Cinderella stories come the first weekend. I like the idea that Kansas State, Houston, these are teams that are talented and are not going to get a lot of respect from the teams that they'll play opening weekend.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this is the first and second rounds are going to be really, really fun to watch. And finishing conference play, everybody is excited for the tournament, but the teams are looking down the road that are ranked in the top 16. And this is when you catch your lunch, so to speak, because these other teams, they just want to win the first round, and they come so focused for that first round. I would tell you there's going to be some upsets and some big upsets in the first and second rounds of this tournament.
Here, let me go over a couple more near upsets and upsets here this week. As Utah took a set against Oregon, that was a surprise. Oklahoma pushed Baylor to 5 sets, but the Bears survived. Minnesota got a must-win game against Ohio State in 4 sets. Of course, we talk at the beginning about USC sweeping ASU. So the Trojans now jumping 9 spots from 34 to 25. They replace Marquette as our top 25 final spot, as FIU won the first set against Western Kentucky, but the Hilltoppers were able to roll after that. You talked about Auburn's key win. A&M leading in the 3rd set, tied 1 set all. Auburn was able to come back and pick up that key victory. I think that kind of covers some of the major matches here over the weekend. And as we look forward into matches to come, Mick, I do want to ask, I'm going to throw a couple matches at you. We did talk about Stanford coming up against Oregon, our marquee match of the weekend. Texas at Kansas State Wednesday. Manhattan is a tough place to play. That's going to be really interesting. Pittsburgh at Georgia Tech. Who do you favor there?
I favor Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh will be ready to play in that match, and they seem to they seem to always have Georgia Tech's number for some reason. I just feel Pittsburgh's on that one. Georgia Tech had a big win over Louisville. Now they've got to produce. They're not the underdogs, and they're going to play Pitt. So I picked Pitt in that. Actually, I picked Pitt to win out, and that will be real interesting to see if that happens.
Interesting. Okay. And then what feels like the final chance for Penn State to really get that marquee win, as Wisconsin will travel to Rec Hall on Saturday. Do you see Wisconsin having any trouble?
I don't, because I think they threw their fans and all their effort into trying to beat Nebraska, and to do that 2 weeks in a row and not be successful the first time, it takes a little edge off. I'll be interesting to see if the fans can get into it as much as the players. Both of them have to help each other on this one with Wisconsin, or they could get rolled.
All right, let's take a look at the Volleyball Magazine Super 16 media poll now. And Mick, all 12 voters gave Nebraska the #1 spot. It's Stanford at 3 with Texas, Louisville to follow. Very similar looking, actually, to the AVCA poll in the top 10 with Georgia Tech, Pitt, Washington State, Tennessee. It's good to start to see the coaches and the media conglomerating on this. Meanwhile, I took Arizona State out of my top 16 with their loss to USC. I'm surprised that Purdue is not getting enough love. I've put Purdue in the top 16 there. Where were you differing from where the 16 sits here? It's Arkansas, BYU, Kansas, Creighton, Arizona State.
Well, there's a couple of things. Stanford third, I agree with in this poll. Texas fourth. I still think Oregon needs to think up. I think Georgia Tech's too high. I think Pitt's next on Georgia Tech. I do think Kentucky's ahead of Tennessee. And I think they've earned that ahead of Tennessee. I do like Tennessee up there. I think Tennessee ahead of Arkansas right now, but Arkansas ball control's better than Tennessee. So that's an interesting one. But that threesome right there, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas, that's really interesting. BYU is killing themselves by not getting a tougher schedule this preseason. They need 3 to 6 really good preseason matches, and they're not doing it. The conference, they played Texas early in the conference, so there's no buildup. There's no way for BYU to do anything, and yet we watch and we know they're pretty good, but yet they haven't really beaten anybody lately. And that Kansas State 3-0 meant that something was wrong there. They didn't have their focus. They weren't on the same page. Something happened there. Kansas losing their outside hitter. How bad does that hurt them? That's the question on Kansas.
Well, I will say, of any team, and you kind of talked about this with Nebraska, Kansas already had 4 outside hitters. Remember, they were having to use Caroline Bien only in the back row. So if there was a team and a coach in Ray Bouchard that I feel like the injury is not going to cripple them. It might hurt a little bit. Reagan Cooper's a new addition from Texas Tech, but if she is unavailable, I do think they'll have 3 pin hitters to rotate through.
Well, Cooper is really good. I mean, she's really good. And so that's an interesting. So I have Creighton ahead of Kansas, and I might have had Creighton ahead of BYU, actually, in my poll. I don't have it here in front of me. And I did take Arizona State out, but I tell you, I think Purdue is in that 16th spot right now in my poll.
All right, perfect. Well, that'll wrap things up here. Stay tuned. I've got a segment that I recorded over at Gregory Gym last week with Molly Phillips, Emma Halter. A lot of fun chatting with those Longhorns. For now, he's Mick. I'm Daniel. We'll throw it over to that. Joined now here at the Gregory Gym, Molly Phillips, Emma Halter. Thanks so much for joining me. We're going to kind of sit back a little bit, talk a little bit about yourselves, get to know Emma and Molly. I want to ask you first question, kind of getting into underclassmen life. If you have any pieces of advice for high schoolers getting out there, maybe curious about going to big schools compared to their smaller high schools, anything like that. What was your first impression of Austin and then Gregory too?
Yeah, I think moving to Texas and Austin was probably the best decision of my life. It's really far from home, but I was able to learn a lot about myself and just figure out kind of who I am on this journey. Also, Greg is just insane, so super fun. The fan base here is actually wild, and then the city of Austin is just a blast. There's you never run out of things to do here. So.
And on the other side, someone who's been here a few years, was this past off-season different in any way, coming off of the championship, or was it a little bit more similar than people might think at home?
I think a lot of people cared more about our team after we won, which was cool. I know going around Austin got noticed more, a lot of more congrats and everything like that. But volleyball wise, it was business as usual. We added in beach, so we did a lot more of that and got to travel a little bit for that, so that was really fun. But all in all, volleyball was pretty similar, but outside of volleyball was pretty cool.
And then when you first got to Austin, had you heard kind of what it was about? Had you known the vibe of this city, and then how did it kind of live up to the expectations?
Yeah, so I'm from Dallas, so I'm a Texas girl. So I've been around Austin a little bit. My cousin played football here, so got to come down to a lot of games growing up. But you don't really know what it's like until you live here and experience the whole thing, and it's great. I mean, there's always something going on with music, different festivals, everything like that. It's really cool.
And then if you had to pick one iconic restaurant, what would it be?
Oh man, there's so many. Oh, I don't know. I really like brunch. So any brunch place, Paperboy is really good, and you always have to get a reservation a month in advance for that place, but it's really good. So any brunch place, but.
Oh goodness. I think the first place I went here, and a place that I always recommend, is Rudy's. It's just kind of a classic. I love their breakfast tacos. So yeah.
Okay, when it comes to playing matches, whether it be the Friday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, usually you guys are Friday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, is there one that you prefer over the other? Do you like the shortened week and then you have a couple days off between, or is the Friday, Saturday something that you've just kind of gotten used to? We'll start with Molly.
I've kind of liked the back-to-back games. We worked our schedule a lot, and our coaches are good about giving us time off, so we've had a lot of double days off, which is so nice and lets us be kids, and it's really fun to just have a weekend where you can just be a college kid and get away from volleyball a little bit, so that's been nice.
Yeah, I like the Thursday, Friday games, or just back-to-back games in general, because then our families can come and be here, and then we have time to spend with them, and like Molly said, just be a college kid. So.
Okay, now we get to kind of reveal the curtain a little bit. I need to hear one or two Jarrett Elliott stories. Jarrett Elliott, I need to kind of find out whether there's funny moments that you've had in your years here, or in the just year and a half, whether it's been, if you could think of anything, I need you to kind of expose him a bit.
I think every interaction with Jarrett ends up being funny. He's just a goofy guy. A lot of people once you get to know him, you see his personality, and he likes to make jokes about anything, and so that kind of stuff's really fun. But I feel you had a funny interaction with him the other day with his passing and everything like that.
Oh yeah, we have an understanding that we can just kind of make fun of each other, and it's funny. So the other day in practice, he shanked the ball and said that it was on purpose, and I really don't believe it was. So we make fun of each other for that, and he'll tell me he can pass. I'm like, okay, you can pass. I want you to be able to pass. Or I asked him if he could run, and that was an accident because he definitely can run. But now we just joke about it, so it's funny. He has a good sense of humor.
Obviously, pipeline of volleyball in Indiana, and I'm sure there's a bunch of Indiana volleyball people there. Was there a big difference between the style of play down in Texas compared to Indiana?
I don't think so. I think both places super competitive with volleyball. It's a big thing in both states, but definitely in college, just in general, and with the coaches here, Eric, David, Jarrett, all of them, they really helped me develop my play in different ways. So, but the style of volleyball, I think it's about the same. Super intense, both places.
And then being a Texan, it's weather-wise, I just want to talk, because there's such a discrepancy. Obviously, we're here this week. It's freezing.
Yeah, it's freezing.
40 degrees yesterday, and it's got to be a little bit more Indiana than Texas in it, though. But the Final Four this year is in Tampa, which is my home state. A little bit warmer.
Yeah.
If you had to kind of pick, would you choose a hotbed for volleyball in Nebraska and have the Final Four there, or would you kind of pick a more desirable weather outcome in December?
Well, I do like the warmer weather for sure. It is really cool to have somewhere like Nebraska where it's going to be sold out and it's going to be packed. But I definitely think they can do that in Tampa too. So it's going to be cool, and it will be nice to not have. I mean, it was literally snowing the whole time we were there this last year, which was. I mean, it was cool to have snow in December. We don't have that here, so it was a good change. But I think it's also good either way. I like the warm, so.
I didn't like it. I'm excited for Florida. Make sure to get your tickets now in Tampa. Thank you so much, Molly Phillips, Emma Halter.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap this one up. This is 6 Rotations.